My name is Stephen Costa. I'm the Director of Technical Services here at Microsol Resources, but I also happen to be the resident Civil 3D expert and Civil 3D certified expert. Today's webinar, as pointed out, will be focusing on the what's new features of Civil 3D and InfraWorks 2018. Civil 3D 2018 will be a full-on live demo of some of the new features and some of the things that we should be looking out for with those new features. InfraWorks, unfortunately, due to technical difficulty of my own doing, will have to be by PowerPoint. But there aren't as many new features in terms of the context of having to show you how they work, but I'll make sure to cover all of them in detail via PowerPoint slide deck. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and just launch into one of the first new features, and we'll start looking at some of the features. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a quick drawing, and the very first new feature for Civil 3D 2018 is the ability to set feature lines relative to a surface. So any of you who have done extensive grading using feature lines will find this pretty useful. It can function in a variety of ways, so let me just go ahead and jump into this project and talk a little bit about the setup, and then we'll explore the way the new tools work and behave. So as you can see, we have a pretty simple site plan, a little bit of existing and proposed grading. And on the northwest corner of the project, we have a couple of feature lines that are going to be, that are the sketch for a possible retaining wall. So I'll go ahead and I'll zoom in a little bit further, and to simplify the drawing, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the visibility of the existing contours. And what you see left is a proposed parking surface, as well as two feature lines that are going to be used to grade that retaining wall. So to get started, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use one of the features that came out last year to take this feature line and create a corridor that generates a retaining wall. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start that off by going to corridor. I'm going to go ahead and call this retaining wall. And I'm going to select for my baseline type a feature line, and I'm going to go ahead and just select it. You can see it's labeled RW1. We're going to use a pre-built assembly for just the retaining wall subassembly, and we're going to target the surface that's visible in the background, which is this blue contour that you see here. Belongs to the surface labeled FG. I'm going to go ahead and leave the set baseline and region parameters unchecked to just generate a quick corridor, right? So if I go ahead and bring up the corridor and object viewer and do a zoom to fit, you can see there's that corridor that I just generated. Now, because we used, and I'm going to just choose my display order, because we used the feature line to define that corridor, like an alignment and profile, we can control its horizontal and vertical geometry by the corridor by editing the feature line. So let's explore a little bit about the new feature, which is the ability to set the surface relative to another. And I'm just fiddling around with my second monitor. There we go. To bring up the elevation editor for that feature line. So by right-clicking and choosing Elevation Editor, I've brought up the dialog window. Now, for the most part, this dialog window is identical to previous releases. There is something new that I'm pointing out right now, which is the relative to surface feature. Now, what this does is it gives you the ability to set one or all or a handful of the elevation points for that feature line to be relative to a particular surface. So as an example, I can go ahead and select all the elevation points and select the relative to surface set to the finished grade. Now you'll see that once I've done that, the elevation editor expands and I get a column labeled elevation derived from, and you have one of two choices: absolute elevation or relative elevation. Absolute elevation being a physical elevation of, say, elevation 1255.7, or an elevation that's relative to the surface that I chose. So in this particular example, what I'm going to go ahead and do is split my screen up into two viewports, make it a little bit easier for you to visualize what's actually happening. And I'm going to go ahead and use that corridor as my, let's select that top left corner, and maybe I'll do that. All right. And I'll turn off a visibility style. And you know what? Let's look at it from this angle. Perfect. So at this point, what we can do is go back to the elevation editor. And you'll see that now I'm going to go ahead and toggle all these to be derived from a relative to surface elevation. Now, if you notice, all of them except the last one were toggled to relative to surface. Why is that? Well, much like when you try to adopt a elevation from a surface and you get 0, right? If the feature line extends beyond the limits of the surface, then it won't have anything to be relative to. So it'll remain at absolute elevation. Just something to keep in mind. So what I'm going to go ahead and do now is reselect all those elevation points and set a relative elevation. But before I do so, I want to make sure I set my corridor to rebuild automatically. So that way, once we do adjust some of these values, you'll see them happen in real time. So once again, I've highlighted all the elevation points. I'm going to set a relative elevation of 2 feet. And now you'll notice that that is going to be relative 2 feet from the surface up to the feature line, which then controls the corridor. All right. So extremely powerful for not having to go through and make a lot of these changes over and over again as you further develop your surface, your finished grade surface in this particular example. Another example of that would be to select the surface, and let's just suppose I want to go ahead and raise and lower this, and I'm going to just raise it by 5 feet. Right. As you can see there, the corridor remains relative to that surface. Now, where this is also useful is when you're doing some site grading and you have curb islands and things of that nature. Now, I'm feeling a bit apprehensive about showing you this new tool and then showing you a gotcha that I came across and have an open case with Autodesk. But I think it's quite important for everybody to be aware of how these tools can be used and unfortunately how they are not exactly working as intended at the moment. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to go ahead and just recreate a quick curb island here, and I'll demonstrate what the issue is, because when I heard this new feature was part of the Civil 3D 2018 feature set, I was actually quite excited, because anybody who's done any amount of grading and has had to constantly adjust islands, medians, any topographical features that are relative to a surface over and over again as the design changes would know how painstaking that process could be. So the idea that you could set, for instance, a curb island or a median to be relative to the finished grade surface is extremely powerful. It completely eliminates the process of having to go back and forth and make those adjustments. So to give you an example of how that would be illustrated here, right, I'm going to go ahead and just take this feature line that I just generated, or I'm sorry, this polyline, and convert it to a feature line. Let me drag this over, and I'm going to go ahead and just call this curb, give it a counter. I'm going to erase existing entities, and I don't need to assign any elevations. And then what I'm going to do is do a quick stepped offset to the inside with an elevation difference of 6 inches, right? A ½ a foot reveal for that curb, right? So bottom of curb, top of curb. So what I'm going to do now is use the same functionality that I just showed you, right? I'm going to select all my elevation points. I'm going to go ahead and select it to be relative to the finished grade surface. You do need to reselect again your elevation points to set it to relative surface, and then once again reselect and then set them all relative to 0. So that means that feature line would be relatively 0 to the entire surface, right? So there's all my points. You saw it pop up in real time. I'm going to do the same thing to the top of curb, right? Elevation editor, go through those same steps, select relative to surface, select the relative elevation, and set that to be ½ a foot above the surface. Again, extremely powerful, right? If I were to come back and lower that entire surface, right, go to raise lower, and this time go -5, right, you'll see that those feature lines remain attached. Now, again, if you've done any amount of grading, you realize how powerful what I just showed you is. The problem happens when you actually start adding these to the surface as a break line. So I'll give you an example of what happens, and I'll give you the workaround until Autodesk can address the issue. So if I were to add these to the surface as a break line, what I want you to do, let me just zoom in closer. What I want you to do is take a look at what happens to the feature line that represents the offset for half a foot from the surface. So I'm going to right click, add to surface as break line, and I'm going to go ahead and add that to FG. And I'm just going to go ahead and give this some supplementing factors, and because we have some relatively tight curves, maybe tighten up that middle ordinate distance. And when I've added it, you'll see that it created the surface correctly. However, it auto-adjusted the relative surface again because now it's going another additional half a foot above what has been already labeled half a foot. And every time you rebuild the surface, it compounds that value, right? So a big issue, open case with Autodesk. They're tracking the bug, and it's slated to be fixed in the next hotfix or service pack. The way I found to get around that, because it's also equally important if you are going to jump into Civil 3D and 2018 and you want to use this functionality right away, the workaround I came up with when I was kind of looking at some ways to get around this issue is I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that break line definition. I'm going to go ahead and re-add it, right? So I'm going to go ahead and take these two feature lines, add them to the surface as a break line. Again, this time I'm going to do one quick step, which is to take the feature line that represents the top of curb and re-edit the elevation editor so that it's relative to 0. That kind of snaps it back down to the top of curb, and then you can continue to move this as you need, right? So it's one extra step. It solves the issue that you just saw. But ideally, once the first service pack or hotfix is issued, you'll see that functionality will continue to work without having to go through that additional step. So I just wanted to show you that workaround if you are jumping into 2018 and want to explore using this feature. The next new feature is the ability to create offset profiles. Again, you're going to see that most of these new features cater heavily towards the transportation industry. Corridor alignment, vertical geometry, those sorts of features within Civil 3D. Now, the new feature for creating an offset profile is going to be demonstrated as follows. On the viewport on the top half of the screen, you see just a quick subdivision project. You have an alignment representing the center line of a roadway, and you have an area where you have additional parking that's perpendicular to that roadway. What we'd like to do is be able to control, for example, what happens along that edge of travel way when in the area of the parking. So suppose that you want to have a normal crown for your roadway pitching down at 2%, but you don't want to have to place some sort of catch basin or something to collect the water at either of the two ends, right? So suppose you want to channel it along the edge of travel way to be collected at a different location. So as an example, how would we handle that, right? So we're going to go ahead and you'll see that this is going to dovetail nicely into one of the other features that we'll see later on. So what I'm going to go ahead and do to get started is I'm going to go ahead and select my alignment, and I'm going to go ahead and create a quick offset alignment, right? So that's how we get started. And when I drag over the dialog window, I'm just going to go ahead and just start with the typical things, right? I'm going to go ahead and just add an offset to the right-hand side since our upstation moves from south to north. I'm going to go ahead and give a offset 14 feet to the right, which will give me a nice offset right to the edge of travelway. And for all intents and purposes, this is identical to what you see in 2017. What is new in 2018 is this tab labeled Create Offset Profile. And the way the Create Offset Profile works is you go ahead and select which of the profiles that are children to the parent alignment, in this case Road B, you want to use. In this case, there's only one, FGC. And you're going to see that you can choose which of the profile views to superimpose it onto, right? I've already selected it to be for this profile view that you see in the bottom viewport. And then, of course, you can choose a cross slope from the parent profile to offset that new profile, right, or the offset profile. So in this case, it's going to take whatever the profile is for Road B, go 14 feet at 2%, and it's going to set that new elevation, right? So all I have to do is go ahead and press OK. And what you're going to see is that offset alignment and offset profile show up in the drawing. Now, those of you may be thinking, well, that's great and all, but suppose I want to be able to control where I'm at specific elevations. So suppose I need to go from normal crown to something other than normal crown. How would you do that? Well, that's easily handled as well. What I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to select my offset alignment that I just generated, And because I have multiple things selected, I'm going to select it again. And through the right-click context menu or through the ribbon, whichever you prefer, you're going to see that there is a new tool called Offset Profile Properties. So by selecting the Offset Profile Properties, I'm going to go ahead and bring up this dialog window. And on the far right, you're going to see that there is a tab labeled Offset Parameters. In there, again, it's just sort of recapping the information that we set, right, which is the road B, 14 feet to the right. The parent profile is FGC. And we, at this point, only have one region that starts at 0, right? And it goes at 2%, and that is pretty much the only value that's utilized throughout the entire offset alignment. So if I do want to start adding changes, I can go ahead and just select this plus symbol, and it's going to take me back into Civil 3D where I can either type in or just simply snap to a particular station. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is enable my object snap, and I'm going to go ahead and just snap to this endpoint right here at that curb return. And then it's going to prompt me to specify the station slope. I'm just going to go ahead and do -2 once again. And you'll see that now by pressing enter, I've now set that station, right? And suppose now I want to go 20 feet further from that curb return and go at a different cross slope. Well, let me just remember that number, right? 794.38. Suppose I want to go 20 feet. I'm going to go ahead and click the plus symbol. And this time, instead of entering, snapping to a value, I'm going to type in a value of 814 plus 0.38. And I'm going to go ahead and set that station slope to -5. Right? And again, I could keep on doing this, right? The command is still active. But for the sake of illustration, I'm going to go ahead and just press enter to go back to the dialog window to show you that I was able to add that information in. So I'm going to go ahead and click the plus symbol one more time and select where I'd like my transition to end. And again, I'm going to choose a very similar point to the one at the beginning of the parking bay. And I'm going to snap to that curb return. I'm going to choose a default value of -2. And I'm going to go ahead and press enter. And there we go. I have 973.56, but I also want to transition where I have 20 feet before this station to get that 5% grade to transition from -5 to -2. So again, I know that my station here I can see is 973.56. So if I want to add another one, I'm going to add it at 953.56. And I can do that by clicking the plus symbol and then just typing in the station value of 953.56 and then another cross slope of -5. And then pressing enter, you'll see that now I've filled in that information. The last thing I need to do is either click OK or click and apply and OK. And I'm going to go ahead and just click apply. And what I want you to see is it adjusted that offset profile. So extremely powerful for being able to control the edge of travelway or any type of feature where you need an additional profile to control your geometry. So there's the 20-foot transition from 2%, 5%, and then back to 2%. All right? So that's the creating offset profiles inside of Civil 3D 2018. I'll go ahead and close this drawing up, and we'll move on to the next new feature. So the next new feature is the ability to create connected profiles, connected alignments, I'm sorry. And again, an extremely powerful tool. If you've ever been in a situation where you've needed to generate a corridor manually because of complex geometry, or suppose you have an intersection where the, let's say it's a four-way intersection, but the crossing road from the primary road, the secondary road has an offset, so you require two different alignments, in which case you need to manually generate that corridor or that intersection. It's again a very not difficult but time-consuming task. So the idea behind creating an offset, a connected alignment, is that we can generate the alignment and profile information for the returns in such a way that they remain dynamically connected. Right? So I'm going to step you through an exercise where we go through and do exactly that. And the only prerequisite necessary to make the tool work is that you need a couple of offset alignments similar to the way that you see this intersection set up for this primary road and the cul-de-sac, right? So what you're going to want to do before you start the tool is to create offset alignments that represent the edges of travelway for both the primary and secondary road. This will enable us to utilize the Create Connected Alignment tool. For the sake of visualization, I'm going to go actually and freeze the curb return layers, right? I believe that's that layer there, right? just to simplify, I want to make sure that you can see in real time what's happening. So I've just frozen the line work. Again, this lines and polylines that represent those curb lines. And again, with these offset alignments that represent, I think it's 12 feet and 12 feet from the center lines of roadway, I'm going to go to my alignment drop down in the Create Design panel. And you're going to see that there is something towards the bottom called Create Connected Alignment. So what that's going to do is it's going to go ahead and start the process. So activating the tool and looking at the command line, you'll see that it's asking me to select the first alignment. That's going to be the offset alignments that I was mentioning earlier, right? So I'm going to select this very first one here to the right of the center line for the primary road. I'm going to be prompted to select the second alignment, in which case I'm going to select the offset for the secondary road. And I'm going to have to choose a location for where that alignment is going to be connected, right? And so you're going to choose towards the inside of the return, right? In this case, the return is on this side, so I'm going to choose this quadrant down here somewhere. And you get this very quick graphic that shows you, is that the way that you'd like to show the information, in which case all I have to do is press enter to bring up the Create Connected Alignment dialog window. Now this dialog window is relatively straightforward, right? You're going to go ahead and give it a name. I'll call this Entrance to Cul-de-sac, and it's the right-hand side, right? Just good naming convention just to make sure that there's no confusion later on. And then I only need to really set two parameters, right? The first parameter is the curve radius, right? You have to determine what that radius is going to be. Again, as a designer or as an engineer, you're going to have that information ahead of time, whether it's a predetermined design detail by the governing agency, or you're just going to go ahead and enter in a value based off of what the design criteria are. And then you also have an option to select a connection overlap. That's how far beyond the edges of the return you extend that alignment and profile. In this case, the connection overlap will extend from that edge of return 10 feet towards the secondary road and 10 feet back from the primary road. And then last but not least, I'm just going to choose no labels because I don't really care about seeing labeling along that alignment. And all I have to do now is press OK. All right. So that alignment that you see there and also stores a profile that represents the alignment. Now, there's a lot to show you in the profile view, but I just want to give you a very quick preview that if I were to grip edit that alignment, right, notice how it stays connected, right? And what you're seeing there is obviously the alignment staying connected, but the profile would be readjusting and recalculating. The reason why this is powerful for those of you who may not do a lot of intersection control is that anytime that you were creating an intersection manually, you had to always recalculate or use labels to figure out, okay, from my TGL, what's my cross slope? At that cross slope, what is my, what's my percentage across, and calculate the point there, calculate the secondary point here, and draw the profile. Again, not necessarily difficult, but time consuming. So this definitely speeds up that process. What I'm going to go ahead and do to further illustrate this point, I'm going to split this viewport into two sections, right, with the alignment on the left, and I don't need that much room, and the profile is on the right. Now, because I generated this alignment, I can create a profile view to see the information that's in that profile view. So I'm just going to go ahead and just choose the user specified height, and I'll create my profile view just somewhere here off to the right, right? So this profile that you're seeing here represents this alignment, right? So the nice thing is everything, because it's dynamically tied to both the secondary and the primary road's alignment and profile, you'll see that, for example, if I were to edit this profile, which represents the cul-de-sac secondary road alignment, and let's suppose instead of having a sag, I want to have a crest, you're going to see that that alignment, that profile adjusted automatically, right? Extremely powerful for not having to recreate and recalculate all the information within that intersection manually. One added little tidbit of that's worth knowing is that while it's tied in at the points where the profile and alignments meet at the intersections, you can still control what happens in between those 2 points. So suppose that you didn't want the water from the primary road coming across and collecting down in the cul-de-sac. Let's suppose you wanted to channel it through the primary road, right? You could add simply by selecting that profile, right-clicking and editing the profile geometry. I could very easily come in here and add a new PVI at that location, right? And you can add a crest curve. You can have complete control over the geometry that happens in this location. And so extremely powerful, very useful for creating pull-offs, or I should say, obtuse connections for, let's say, a exit ramp on a highway for subdivision work like this cul-de-sac. It's very versatile, very flexible. So definitely explore this if you do a lot of transportation work. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that up. Now we're going to move on to our next new feature. And our next new feature is the ability to create multiple corridor baselines. Now, those of you who do a lot of corridor modeling will know that there are certain limitations, right? Like any application and like any tool within an application, there's going to be things you can do easily. There's going to be things that you can't do yet. In the case of corridor modeling, up until Civil 3D 2018, you didn't have the ability to control a feature line, or let me rephrase this. You didn't have the ability to utilize a dynamically linked feature line that was part of a corridor as another baseline to that same corridor. Now, that probably sounded like babble if you don't do a lot of corridors. So let me illustrate what I mean exactly. And to do so, I'm going to start by creating a very simple corridor and work my way up to designing something that again reflects this parking bay, right? How to model this parking bay efficiently and quickly. So I'm going to just start with the basics, right? I'm going to create a corridor, and I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I choose my appropriate alignment. And I'm going to use the profile, and I'm going to use pre-built assembly. And there's no targeting that needs to happen. But what I will do is I will set the frequency to, let's say, every 5 feet, right? Just a nice tight corridor. And I'm going to go ahead and click OK and rebuild my corridor. So there's my corridor, right? It represents just the primary road moving through and doesn't really address any information about the parking bay. To simplify things, I'm actually going to split the region into a couple of distinct parts, right? Namely, the area where my parking bay is located, I want to segregate out into a distinct region, right? So you can see here I split the region so that I just have this little piece right here. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select my corridor. And from the launch pad in the contextual panel, I'm going to go ahead and select feature lines from corridor. What I'm going to do before I do it is I want to extract the edge of travelway along just this part of the region. So I'm going to go ahead and select feature lines from corridor. When prompted down at the command line, I'm going to go ahead and select by regions. When I'm asked to select a corridor or region, I'm just going to select the corridor in between the region that I'm interested in. And once I've done that, I'm going to right-click and choose Enter. And then you'll be given this dialog window where you can choose which of the feature lines you'd like to extract. I want to extract the right-hand side of that roadway. So I'm going to go ahead and find ETW, Edge of Travelway, right. And click that check box and leave everything else unchecked. All right. And I'm going to go ahead and extract that feature line. Now that feature line you can see there highlighted, and if I use my selection set, you can see here that there's an auto corridor feature line that was generated. All right. Now what I was suggesting earlier is that up until 2018, this dynamically linked feature line could not be used as a baseline to further develop the corridor. That is the new feature in 2018. So as an example, if I wanted to add that feature line as a baseline, all I need to do is choose my corridor, and I can go ahead and choose Add Baseline. I'm going to go ahead and select Feature Line, and I'm going to use that gutter line feature line that I just generated, right? That was just the default naming convention that was utilized. And I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And now I've added that to the baseline, that baseline to the corridor. And just to reemphasize that point, you can see here in my corridor properties, there's that gutter line, right? And instead of being a horizontal and vertical baseline alignment profile, it's just simply a feature line. Now the nice part is I can continue to build and add a region to this corridor. So using that baseline. So I'm going to select my corridor once again. I'm going to choose Add Regions from the contextual ribbon. I'm going to go ahead and select the baseline. Now I know I have a baseline here, and because of the visibility of the graphic settings that I have, you can't see that it's actually highlighting it. but you can see that it's labeling it BL gutter line 44. So all I have to do is left click to accept that. And now I can go ahead and just say fill that entire region with a new assembly. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and assign parking. And I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And there's no target mapping to be done, so I'll go ahead and I'll press OK once again. And you can see that now, very easily, I have a secondary piece of that corridor tied to the feature line rather than the main alignment baseline. And just to emphasize this point one step further, I can do that again as many times as I want. So, to step you through that process, suppose I wanted sidewalk adjacent to that parking area. I'm going to select my corridor baseline, and this time I'll go a lot quicker. I'll select my feature lines from corridor. I'm going to go ahead and select my region. I'm going to go ahead and select this region here. And then I'm going to go ahead and collapse and unselect everything except the edge of travel way on the right-hand side. Once again, I'm left with an auto corridor feature line that I can add to the main corridor as another baseline. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Add Baseline. I'm going to go ahead and choose this feature line here. Oops. It's going to be gutter line 2. I guess it was a little bit tricky to grab out all the information there. I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And I'm going to go ahead and add a region to that baseline. And again, I'm going to say fill that now with a sidewalk corridor or assembly. And once again, I don't have to do any targeting, but you can see that now I've built that out twice. The great thing is, suppose that the sidewalk needs to stay in the same place and the main center and the main primary road needs to change, but you've changed the design so that you've removed these 3 parking spaces. Because these are all controlled by different baselines, you're going to see that I'm going to select now the grip for just the area within the parking bay, and I can adjust that to, let's say, that point, right? So again, extremely powerful for being able to control individual sections of your corridor while remaining dynamically linked to the primary alignment and baseline. All right? So extremely powerful for transportation modeling. I'm going to go ahead and close this up and not save. And we're going to go ahead and move along to the next new feature. And the next new feature is the ability to clean up corridor bow ties. Now, bow ties are the result of, and I'll just zoom into an area here, right? You can see that there's a corridor here that represents a swale that's behind this retaining wall that's channeling water around the site so that it's collected at a detention basin further on or further up and down the design. Now, what ends up happening is you have situations like this whenever you've modeled, if you've ever modeled with using corridors, where projecting out due to the geometry from, let's say, this location gives you 2 independent values for elevations within the same XY, right, the same coordinate, right? So you end up having these sort of weird shapes that are known as bow ties, and that when looked at in Object Viewer, sort of give you, weird shapes that look a little bit like this, right? It makes it really difficult to control how that corridor looks, and more importantly, if you were to generate a surface from this corridor, to control how those triangles look, right, without having to go in there and do a lot of manual manipulation of either flipping edges or deleting and adding those triangles again. So one of the nice new features of Civil 3D 2018 is the ability to now select your corridor and use the clear corridor bow ties, right? So that's the new tool right there located in the ribbon. I'll give you an example of how it works by selecting the tool. And you're going to see that you're going to be prompted to select the starting sub-entity, right? In this case, it's being generated via this feature line. So I'm going to go ahead and select that as my start entity, and then it's going to ask you to select the ending sub-entity, right? So I'm going to go ahead and choose this part of the feature line here. And now it realizes that there is some work to be done with this area, right? And so, again, it may not be perfect, but let me just turn off object tracking and object snap, right? And let's say I want to do something like this. Once I've chosen that region, I can go ahead and press enter, and it's going to clean that area up for you based on the areas that you chose. All right, so you can see that that cleaned that up fairly nicely, and I can continue to do that as many times as I want. Once you have added once you've cleaned up a bow tie, you can always go back and either remove it or adjust it. So to give you an example of that, I'm going to go ahead and select the corridor once again, and you can see that it'll give me the ability to restore corridor bow ties, right? So if I were to come in here and let's suppose, maybe I can try to fix this one here, right? I'm going to go ahead and choose this corridor. I'm going to just quickly clear out this one as well. Let's just see what we can get. Maybe I'll just snap to that intersection there and click enter. And that one didn't do such a great job, but that's going to heavily depend on the geometry and the assembly that you've chosen. But now that I have two in there, right, when I choose this corridor, I can step through and say restore the corridor bow ties. And you can see I can go ahead and just, it'll step me through. Do I want to skip this one? And do I maybe want to redo this one, right? So I want to rebuild and restore this one here, and then I can go ahead and give it another shot, right? So I can go ahead and choose my start and end, and again I can choose something maybe like that, and we'll see how that looks, right? So the ability to clear and restore those corridor bow ties gives you a little bit more flexibility in adjusting corridors that have bow ties due to either the geometry, the assembly, or a combination of both. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and close this up. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the next new drawing. And the next new drawing is the ability to control how sections behave inside of your, either within your plan production or draft view settings, right? So again, very similar job that we saw earlier where I was working on the alignments, the connected alignments for the cul-de-sac. It's the same project. Project has been developed further. We now have some additional sample lines tied to this alignment. We've generated a series of section views, and so there's going to be two new features that I want to show you within Civil 3D 2018. The first relates to the ability to have line work not part of the actual cross-section tied to the section view that it's being called out on. All right, so I'm going to give you a quick example here by just zooming into this area, right? And you're going to see that now within the section views, there's this what's known as a view frame buffer. The idea behind this view frame buffer is that information placed within that view frame buffer becomes associated with that section view. So for example, I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick revision cloud, and I'm going to go ahead and just choose object, and then I'm going to go ahead and select maybe just, oops, let's try that again. Forgot to accept that. Accept. Maybe I'll go in here and add a multi-leader. And I'll just put this maybe right there, and I'll say revise. Right? Now, in previous versions of Civil 3D, what would happen is if you just move this section view, none of your text would come along with it. Right? So now, as long as the text is placed within that view frame buffer, or revision cloud, or dimensions, or whatever, right? Anything that's not an actual part of the section view, the corridor, or the section lines will be moved alongside. So as you're creating your sections and your section views, and you're annotating them and putting in notes, you don't really need to be worried about having to make sure you highlight everything and move that to its new location, right? So if I were to go ahead and move that here, you can see that it's now been relocated. And if I were to choose the section view and update the group layout, and it goes back to that location, you can see that it went along with it, right? So it's very easy to now annotate all your sections and your section views and not worry about having to, what happens when you adjust their, if you put in new annotations, new text, new revision clouds, things of that nature. All right. So the other new feature, and actually, you know what? I'm going to actually just make one quick mention, right? Suppose that you had a piece of text here, and I'll just write title, and probably should have made that annotative now that I think about it, because it's quite tiny, and there's my piece of text. Let me make that, yeah, that's a little bit better, right? So you can actually see that. Now the thing is, if that piece of text is outside the view frame buffer, if I were to go ahead and move that, right, you can see that the title remains. The nice thing is the view frame buffers can be adjusted, right? So as long as I move the view frame buffer to encompass the new elements, right? When I move, of course, now I made a liar out of me. Let's just make sure that the text window falls within, all right? And just to this be a little bit safe, let's make sure that that's there. All right, there we go. So either the text box or I hadn't moved it enough. Now you can see as I move the section view, the title moves along with it. All right. So that's one of the updates to section views. The second is going to be the ability to reorient your information within your draft or production view so that you can insert a new section view in line without having to readjust all of them manually. What do I mean by that? Well, suppose I came in here and I want to add a new sample line. So let's say around station 1100, right? I'm going to go ahead and go to my Home tab. I'm going to go to my sample lines. I'm going to go ahead and select my alignment. And I already have a sample collection 1 in here. I'm just going to add one additional sample line. I'm just going to pick something arbitrarily here, 50 feet to the right, left, and I'm done, right? So I was pretty surprised I got a nice whole even station 1124, right? And so suppose I wanted to go ahead and generate a section view for that, right? Create section view. And again, all I'm going to do is just step through and create that section view. All right, so you can see that that section view is now sitting around here. Well, here's 1124, and if I were to look, 1100 and 1200 is located over here, right? So I wouldn't have to manually adjust these. One of the nice new features is the ability to select that section view. Oops, I have too many things selected. Select that section view and move to the section view group, right? So in the contextual ribbon, you can see I'm going to go ahead and select that tool. I believe it's also available in the right-click context menu. Either one or the other. You can choose select section view to move to. And here, since I only have the one section view group, all I have to do is choose that and press OK. And it's going to come in here and add it to 1100, 1124, 1150, 1200, 1250, 1300, right? So it's a very easy way to add new sections based on the fact that maybe there's a critical section there that needs to be added to the drawing set. Well, it's a lot easier to put those in the correct order without the, again, painstaking, not necessarily difficult task of adjusting all of these manually. All right. And let's go ahead and close this drawing up. Go ahead and click No. And then the last new feature within Civil 3D that I want to show you is the ability to set your view frame groups to have different viewport types. Now, in previous versions, you had plan and profile only or plan over profile. In Civil 3D 2018, you now have the ability to generate a new type of view frame that has plan over plan or profile over profile. That means you can stack within the same sheet 2 plans or 2 profiles. And so what I'm going to go ahead and do is, let me just get rid of the previous view frame group. And again, maybe I'll just take a couple of seconds for those of you not maybe necessarily familiar with view frame groups, right? They, like a lot of the other objects, are tied to a particular parent object, in this case the alignment. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is launch my view frame groups from my prospector by right-clicking and choosing Create View Frames. I'm going to bring over that dialog window, and I'm going to go ahead and just step through this, and I'm going to go ahead and choose Road C. In my Sheets part of my Create View Frames, you'll see that there's Plan and Profile, Plans Only, Profiles Only. However, now when you go into either one or Plans, Profiles Only, built in, or of course you can create your own template, you now have the ability to do plan over plan, or you're going to see that there are templates for, in the plan production folder, for plan over plan, plan and profile, or profile over profile. Right? I'm going to give you just a quick example of plan over plan because it's exactly the same steps for profile over profile, and we're kind of nearing the top of the hour, and I do want to spend just a few minutes just going over the PowerPoint presentation for what is new with InfraWorks. So the last step that I'll do is I'm going to just ensure that here's my plan over plan. Once I do select that template, I have a list of the available layouts for that enable me to create those view frame groups, and then further down the road additionally create the sheets associated with those view frame groups. So I'm going to go ahead and just choose a nice small 20 scale. That'll give me, I think, about 3 sheets if I'm not mistaken, and I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And then I'm going to accept a lot of the other defaults that I have set up already. And I'm going to go ahead and click Create View Frame Groups, right? And so here's my view frames, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 view frames, actually. And what I'm going to do is just quickly delete the previous sheets. All right. And so you can see if I go back to model space, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 view frames, right? So this would, in theory, right, in previous versions, be 4 different plan sheets, right? One for each of the view frames. But suppose you want to keep your drawing set down and the geometry facilitates you the ability to show this plan on 2 sheets. Well, that is what we're going to go ahead and do by creating the new sheets using that plan over plan. So you're going to see that I'm going to go ahead and right click on that view frame group that I just created, and I'm going to go ahead and select Create Sheets. I'm going to go ahead and just drag that over, and really there's not much for me to really change here. All I'm going to go ahead and do is click Create Sheets, and it'll let me know, hey, to complete this process, your drawing will be saved. I'm going to go ahead and click OK, and it's going to generate those sheets. And you'll see down at the bottom, sheets 21 and 22 were created, right? And if I were to take a look at example sheet 21, you can see here that now I have 2 plans stacked on top of one another, right? So again, it really helps you in terms of plan production, being able to allocate the resource or the types of views you want to either reduce the amount of sheets you have in your construction document set, or to simply just illustrate the design in a way that you choose. So again, to reiterate, you have plan over plan or profile over profile. Those are the brand new features to Civil 3D 2018. And that about sums it up for Civil 3D 2018. Those are all the brand new features. Again, as a quick recap, you have the ability to adjust feature lines so that they're relative to a surface. You have the ability to create profiles, offset profiles that are tied to the main profile, right? You have the ability to connect alignments so that if you're doing intersection design, you can have the offset alignments and the curve return alignment and profile tied dynamically to the primary and secondary roads. You have the ability to adjust and create dynamically linked feature lines that are part of a corridor and have them re-added to the same corridor as baseline so that you can further develop your corridor model with individual baselines. You have the ability to clean up bow ties at corridor corners. You have the ability to, in section views, do one of 2 things. The first being you have the ability to now set a buffer where you can, and actually I'm going to just go back to that for one quick second. I believe that when you do, I kind of glossed over this, when you do go and create multiple section views, there is going to be a section placement right in the view group, in the group plot style. I should have pointed this out earlier. Under the Array tab, add a drawing buffer size to space between views. I should have mentioned that when we were first doing that. In this case, I already had that sample line and the section views created. That by default is on, if I'm not mistaken, under command settings. I can't imagine that there's a reason you might want that off, especially if you're going to be annotating your section views. But that's where you'd have the ability to control that buffer being on or not on. All right. The other part of the section views was the ability to move a specific view to the section group, right? That could be any section group that you have in your drawing so that you don't have to readjust the sheets or redraw your section views from scratch. And then last but not least, the ability to set either a plan over plan or profile over profile view frame group so that when you create your sheets, you can have those styled construction documents. Now we have about 8 minutes left according to my clock, but I think our server clock is slow, and I'm actually looking at my cell phone. It's 11:54. So I want to very quickly go over some of the new features for what's new in InfraWorks. And then certainly if you have any questions about what's new, you can go ahead and let me know. All right, so I'm going to give a very quick PowerPoint slide deck just covering the main topics. Again, I would say if you were comparing what's new in Civil 3D to what's new in InfraWorks, what's new in InfraWorks is far subtler, right? There are improvements to performance, there are improvements to just workflow, and there are a few new features in terms of additional tools, but not in the same context and not, in my opinion, in the game-changing way that you see with some of the new features inside of Civil 3D. But the new features for InfraWorks 2018 can be broken down into 4 main categories, right? Tools that improve performance, tools that enable you to more accurately adjust your design roads inside of InfraWorks, the ability to have a little bit more detailed quantities, right? During the conceptualization phase, you want to have a rough idea of the amount of volume for whether it's roadway structures, pipe networks, or grading, cut and fill volumes. That's been improved in 2018. And then last but not least, the ability to create custom bridge components. So if I just step through this quickly, right? Tools that improve performance. I have a video playing here for your, it makes it a little bit easier to illustrate. I know it's not going to play smoothly over our webinar, but you'll get the general idea. Effectively, there are a couple of ways to control your visibility settings for InfraWorks 360, and there are what are now known as views. So you can quickly jump between a couple of different styled views, right? An engineering view, let's say, where you have a more graphical representation, and then another realistic view where you could have, let's say, realistic trees. Right, so during the design process and during the workflow where you're trying to determine how things are going to be placed conceptually in the model, you may not want the overhead of having a realistic tree view set up with shadows and ambient occlusion, right? That's going to detract, unless you have an amazingly powerful machine, from the experience, in the sense that you'll notice slow down as you're toggling and panning through your view, and anytime you need to recreate your InfraWorks model based on design changes, you'll see that you'll get improved performance by enabling things like the ability to turn off realistic views, right? So definitely leverage that. You'll see it's located here where the mouse is. You can jump between 2 different, or by default, 2 different views, and you can create any types of views that you need for either presentation or engineering design purposes. You have the ability to now increase, improved performance for your annotation, right? So if you're looking at either horizontal or vertical geometry information, let's say stationing along your alignment, or you're looking at, your span length, or you're doing some clearance for your bridge or your grading limitations, right? All those values that appear, and as you're seeing sort of pan through, and let me just pause that for a second, right? Actually go back one. Let me go back 1 slide, right? Let me jump to and pause the video, right? You're going to see that these values that are associated here are now adjust, similar to a GIS system where you could zoom in and zoom out, and the values change, and there's improved visibility of those annotations. So as you move through and you're doing a conceptual design meeting, you can easily see those values as they're part of the design. Alongside, there are some new grading interaction tools. Again, you can go ahead and modify within particular regions of your same roadway design what your different grading regions are, right? And there are simplified tools for adjusting, again, whether it's grading to a fixed width, grading to a particular slope, and then adjusting the areas in between so that your transitions between 2 different grading criteria is a lot smoother, and it gives you the ability to control that as you see fit, right? So the gizmo that's associated with those grading adjustment tools has been greatly improved to make that process a lot more efficient. I'll go ahead and move on. As far as road annotations, right, very similar to what you saw earlier. Roadway annotations are now include fixed station labels. They appear and disappear based on proximity, very similar to those of you who are familiar with using Map 3D and GIS information systems, right? You can have labels appear as you zoom out to a particular level, or disappear or appear as you're zooming in and out. All right. You do have an option for automatically creating or converting, I should say, a design road to a component road. If you're not too familiar with what the difference between a design and component road is in InfraWorks, a component road allows you to give very specific criteria and regions for how you want the certain aspects of that road, I should say, if you're familiar with the Civil 3D term of subassemblies, right? How you want portions of that road to appear, whether there's barrier or curb or an additional pull-off lane, things of that nature. So one of the new features, besides that automatic conversion for a design road to a component road, is the ability to match the style for the existing design road. In previous versions, you would often have to set a default value, or it would automatically change to the default style, in which case you would have to go through and make an additional step to adjust the design road conversion for the component road to match the same style that you're working with inside of your model. In addition, since InfraWorks 360, especially for design roads, is referring to a lot of the AASHTO standards for both horizontal and vertical geometry control, as you design your roads based off of the design speed or a type of road, let's say an arterial or a highway, as you make adjustments to that geometry, if you violate the standards, right? Let's say you set a horizontal curve that doesn't meet the minimum radius for that curve, you'll be alerted to the fact that the geometry is non-standard, right? So it'll be highlighted in yellow for you in the contextual stack as well as in the model itself. Again, so just to reiterate, as you make changes to the geometry, if they're substandard for the design speed and the type of road they are, you'll be alerted within the model as well as the contextual stack. In terms of roadway quantities, you can now include all sorts of things, right? So quantities are now included with individual road components. So you can see information about, light poles, signing, railings, right? And get all those quantities so that you can easily tabulate and come up with a rough cost for your conceptual design, as well as being able to export that out in a CSV format, which obviously makes it easier to customize its appearance inside of Excel. All right. And I know we're running out of time. So the last thing I'll talk about is you now have the ability to parametrically design additional new bridge components to be utilized with your bridge structures within the InfraWorks model, right? So you can create these custom components, whether they're piers, abutments, bridge decks, anything of that nature. You can see that the ability to create these custom parts based on either the design criteria for an upcoming project, or simply to use something that's not just out of the box, right? Because after a while, all the objects start looking the same. If there's something that you're looking to recreate as an existing condition or something for a proposed design concept, you can have a little bit more flexibility in how those objects look inside of your InfraWorks model.